Morning, guys and gals. Rise and shine. Happy Saturday. Whew. I haven't even had breakfast yet, you guys. What time is it? Well, it's just after 10:30 here in New York. Good timing because I do have a 12:30 appointment. I made a fruit smoothie the other day. So this video was inspired based on my clinical experience with the population that I work with. I am training to become a clinical psychologist in my 5th year of a PhD program, working on my pre-doc internship. And I work at this clinic. It's a very high volume clinic where we see a number of cases. I mean, like in the thousands of cases, right? A year. And I was struck. I've been struck in awe recently just by working with parents of children who mostly have autism and ADHD, and seeing their difficulty in working with their children, school-age children, trying to get them on task, trying to get them to focus in school. And it's even much more difficult now because of COVID and kids are learning remotely from home. So it's like I empathize with the struggle of these parents, right? And I'm like, wow, like it started to really come together and make a lot of sense in tying the pieces together from my experience in working with this population currently, and hearing Dr. Umar Johnson speak so passionately about this school that he wants to build for African American boys. And his target population specifically is African American boys who have behavioral problems, oftentimes stemming from ADHD, which he likes to refer to as ain't no daddy at home disorder. And I laugh. But it's a serious condition, you guys. ADHD, and a lot of you guys are already familiar with ADHD. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It is a commonly diagnosed disorder, mostly in males, but females also are diagnosed with it too. And in America, we're talking about cases, and like 3 million cases a year. 3 million new cases diagnosed a year. That's with an ADHD. And autism, because I also evaluate, diagnose, and treat children who are diagnosed with autism. Autism also is big business. We're talking about, I think, 200,000 cases, new cases a year. So the prevalence is pretty high. I think I saw a number where it said like 1 out of 54 people are affected by autism. Like, the numbers are through the roof for both of these neurological disorders, you guys. This is serious here. This is serious business. It's big business. There's a high demand for it. It's no surprise that in the clinic where I work, like, we just keep getting cases coming in. Like, I constantly keep getting new emails with, hey, you have an evaluation for so-and-so. I'm like, oh my gosh, like they just keep coming in, you guys. And it's kind of disturbing to see like the numbers like so high, and the numbers are increasing every year. So more and more, there's like a certain percentage of new cases, an increase in new cases a year that we see in the US. Like, this is something serious, and both of these disorders, ADHD and autism, are neurological disorders. So they're neurologically based, and I know there is some discussion about them kind of stemming from immunizations, and that's a theory. I mean, we can believe what we want to believe, right? That's a possibility, but there has been some scientific research to kind of pinpoint the cause, etiology of these disorders, right? So with autism, it's said to have been linked to a protein, a gene called RNF8. RNF8. I had to think like, wait a minute. RNF8. And it said that deficits or a defect in that protein basically leads to more communication between the neurons. So it's more activity happening between the neurons. And it makes sense because when you look at the symptomology of autism, what do you see? An increase in activity level. I mean, parents often complain about their child bouncing off the walls left and right. But there are other symptoms too that are very pervasive within this diagnosis, within children who have autism. So commonly seen is like repetitive behaviors, the way they play and interact with their toys. You usually see the same kind of behavior. Like they'll line up their toys the same exact way all the time, or they're fixated on playing with a certain part of a toy over and over and over again. Body movements are odd, eccentric. It's like things are noticeable. With autism, it's pretty clear. It's pretty noticeable with the eye when a person is living with autism. Also seen, basically how I look at it is like, the way I classify it is there is deficits within the sensory system, right? So we have smell, taste, touch. Usually there is some issues there where they have a fixation when it comes to taste, when it comes to smell, like they like certain smells and they'll like put it to their nose. And what I've seen is like, even with touch and like with texture, like kids will like literally like embrace it, like they really love it, right? Or they may have an aversion to it. So it can be like a fixation on these things, or it can be like an aversion to it where they're like, they can't stand it, right? Or can't stand like certain smells or tastes or sounds. That's another big one. And what else is commonly seen in children with autism? So obviously the hallmark of autism is that they have deficits in their social interaction, right, in communication. Like that's when it's usually first noticed because there are speech delays in these children. So the earliest I've seen a child diagnosed with autism was 18 months. And I'm like, wow, that is super early to detect autism. And I think that's the biggest issue that Dr. Umar Johnson has, and the labeling of these disorders, and how the labeling oftentimes creates more problems than solutions. Because it's like, how do you know? How can you that soon diagnose a child with autism? It's like you're determining their life path trajectory. It's like you're giving them this life sentence so early. But on the flip side, the argument is that, okay, the earlier you detect it, the better that you can intervene. The sooner you can intervene so that you can, offer treatment services. And so these kids who are diagnosed at an early age with autism and even ADHD, they get speech, language therapy, they get occupational therapy because they have some issues with fine motor movements and being able to grab like fine objects and manipulate, smaller objects with their fingers. Things that, let's say, normal kids who develop normally developing kids, things that you see in them are oftentimes not seen in children with autism, or seen at a later age, right? Developmental age. And so that's when their parents, and then feel free to engage, feel free to interact if there are some parents here on this video who have, observed this or have a child. It's up to you if you want to disclose that information. I know some parents, they have lived with this with their child for many years, and so they're more open to talking about it. But it's really up to you. And so these parents have observed this in their child, and they know that, okay, something isn't right. Like my child isn't speaking yet, and they're supposed to at least be, speaking a couple words, before they turn 1 year old, and they notice like, my child hasn't said anything yet, right? Or there are delays when it comes to potty training. So little small nuances like that, that's how they're able to detect and pick up if a child is developing normally and if perhaps they could meet the criteria for autism. Also, something that I have seen, which was really jarring to me. I'm like, whoa. All right, I've seen it in animals, but to see it like live in person in a human being, like, and especially a child, is like, whoa, it's mind blowing. So I've seen in children when I've done like evals in person at the site I work at now, like they will regurgitate their food. They will vomit, and after they've chewed it and swallowed it, like they'll regurgitate it, comes back up in their mouth. They'll chew it and then swallow it because they have issues with digestion. So with autism, like it impacts the individual with autism on so many different levels. We're talking about speech and communication. We're talking about physical development, body movements. We're talking about eye coordination. Their visual response sometimes is off. We're talking about listening response is off. Like so many different factors are impacted to the point where their level of functioning in our society, being able to do day-to-day tasks, is oftentimes moderately or severely impaired. And that's with autism. So with ADHD is also a serious condition, but compared to autism, it's like, okay, it may be in some people's eyes a little bit more manageable, right? Autism is also said to be a neurological condition, but is linked to deficits in norepinephrine. So norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter in the brain that is linked to dopamine. And dopamine, I know you guys have heard about dopamine, right? It's like the good feely hormone, right? The neurotransmitter that makes us feel good and all dopey, right? And dopamine is linked to the pleasure reward center in the brain. And when I started to reflect on the neurological basis of ADHD and how working with parents of children who have ADHD in terms of developing a behavioral management plan, it began to make sense, right? Because internally, there's a deficit in the norepinephrine in their brain, which is linked to dopamine, which is basically the pleasure reward center. It makes sense why developing a behavioral management plan that consists of rewards is highly effective. But there's a trick to it, right? Because I think with behavior management, it seems like intuitive. It seems like, you can just, develop a system. And if the child does a desired behavior or completes a desired task or expected task that you want them to do, you give them a reward, right? But it's not as easy, right? It's not as easy as that, because there has to be a schedule of these rewards and it has to be consistent. Timing is very important. And so what I've noticed is that oftentimes, yes, parents can appropriately choose the right reward because they know their child, so they know what their child likes, and they can appropriately choose the right reward. But what they struggle with is when to give it. So they'll give it like right away, right? And we're talking about behavior across the span of a week that needs to be managed, especially when it comes to school. So, even in parents with children who have normal development, it's like they also struggle with this. Now, some have learned from trial and error, like, okay, it's better to wait till the end of the week. The end of the week when basically you reach the mark where you have seen consistent behavior that you want them to demonstrate. And at the end of the week, you give them a reward. Because if you give them a reward, let's say Monday or Tuesday, or even in the middle of the week, Wednesday, the child is like, all right, I got my reward. No need to perform anymore, right? No need to demonstrate these behaviors that my parent expects of me, especially if it's related to school. Like, and that's not acceptable, you know. Like, kids have to complete their schoolwork and be able to maintain good behavior in school, especially with the remote learning. You know, it's more challenging. I don't want to like undermine the difficulty of it. It is challenging, but it's still, you still got to stay on task. You still got to do this. You still got to be on top of it. And so this is what made me think about Dr. Umar Johnson, because I'm like, he's right on point. What the freak is that? Is that phone? You guys, I found, like when I was moving, I found this old ass track phone. And it still works. It still turns on. I actually charged it and turned it on. I think that's what I hear buzzing. Like, what is that freaking buzzing? So maybe it's buzzing on its own. Let me get rid of it because I don't like things buzzing like that. So, yeah, it really dawned on me, clicked. It was like, wow. And given that this is Dr. Umar Johnson's expertise, for me, my expertise is still developing. Like, I've worked with many different populations, right? So I work with adults who have severe mental illness in psychiatric hospitals. I work with children in residential treatment facilities who have severe mental illness, ADHD, bipolar, depression, schizophrenia, you know, psychotic disorders in general. I've worked in prisons. I worked in a prison setting, you know, with children and adults who have committed some very heinous crimes, you know, armed robbery, murder, assault, and they also have mental illnesses, right? So my experiences they're pretty broad, whereas Dr. Umar Johnson, his is more narrow in focus. He has a degree, I believe, in school psychology. He's a certified school psychologist. And he also has a degree in, he has a PhD in clinical psychology. And he's been in the field for many years. I've been in the field for many years, but I've kind of been like in and out of the field, like intermittently. So the past 4 years, I've obviously been in the field working on my PhD. But before that, I was working on my master's degree in mental health and clinical mental health counseling. And then before that, like I kind of took a break. So there has been some break. Whereas like Dr. Umar Johnson, I give him much credit and respect because he has consistently worked in the field for over a period of time. And he's focused. That's his main focus. This is what he does. Like, you know, that's when he first entered the field, he was a school psychologist and he was evaluating children, you know, for developmental disorders usually diagnosed in childhood, mainly ADHD, learning disability. And from his experience, as he always says, like from his observations and experience, like he realized, like, you know what, there is a problem with our educational system, right? It's like, okay, on one hand, it's good that they have this in place, right? This mechanism in place where they could detect. So they have a school psychologist, a person who children are referred to, and they can go get evaluated, and they get these IEPs and these plans to kind of help intervene and give them the services that they need based on their deficits. But then it can be problematic. And I've seen a post recently on Facebook. I'm a member of this Facebook group for parents of children with intellectual disabilities and other disabilities. And somebody posted to say, you know, what has been your biggest issue with the IEP process, right? And looking at the responses, I'm just like, wow. It's good to just listen to parents. I'm wondering, like, do schools ever take the time to really listen to what parents have to say, right? Or do they just evaluate the child, diagnose them, offer some services, and say, all right, you know, get the hell out of our face, basically. And I've seen one parent comment on that post and said, basically, the issue that she has is that they treat the child like they're a number. So it's like, okay, once they put them through the process, that's it, right? Evaluate, diagnose, here are some services, all right, next, you know, kind of thing, like it's an assembly line, you know, it's like, what? Like, these are individuals and they don't really care. They don't put the extra care and attention to working with these precious children. So that's where Dr. Umar Johnson decided to develop this school. The idea for a special school for African American boys came about alongside his dedication and commitment to being a Pan-African. So that's an interesting intersection. So here we have a school psychologist, a person who is well versed in working with children who have different behavior, let's say, right? And then you have a man that's also committed to an identity, a movement of Pan-Africanism. Interesting intersection there. And you think they would kind of go hand in hand. And in our mind, especially if you're a Pan-African, they do. But then they can also conflict, because when you think about Pan-Africanism in of itself, that's a political movement, social political movement. Anytime you're dealing with politics, there's issues. So you're merging politics with education. Education is very important, right? But it's difficult. Imagine if he was just only focused on the educational aspect, right? And wanting to help these children out. Wouldn't be an issue if there was no focus and emphasis on black identity, black first, African first, right? But he makes a conscious effort to emphasize African first, teaching children their African identity, undoing the damage that has been caused in living in a racially oppressive, white-dominated society. So therein lies the issue there, because there's kind of like a parallel process happening, right? So unfortunately, there is like an agenda, even within the educational system, right? That he points out, a school to prison pipeline, right? There's an agenda. They just want to diagnose, treat. They make money. It's a cash cow. I said this at the start of the video, how diagnosing ADHD and autism is big business. Now, even though they have found this neurobiological link to these disorders, who's to say that it wasn't man-made before that, beyond that, right? Who's to say it wasn't constructed? Who knows? There's so many different theories. There's so many different assumptions that are being made. But we know that there is an agenda. We do know that. They have their own agenda. And oftentimes it is counterproductive to what black parents want for their children. I know this for myself just in working with black parents of children with autism and ADHD. They don't want their child in a least restrictive environment, because that shapes who they are, right? When they're put in this, and sometimes, of course, they need to be there, but do they need to be there throughout the entire time of their childhood, and middle school, and high school? And then it's it creates this person this caged animal. It's shaping this person to be something that they're not, right? It's you want to kind of nurture a sense of humanity in these children. And I think that's what Dr. Umar Johnson is trying to get at, and he's trying to kind of interrupt those agendas within the educational system, and obviously within the racially oppressive system of our society. Those two parallel agendas that are happening, he's trying to interrupt those things with this school called the FDMG Academy, Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy. I think it's a wonderful idea. Now, here is the thing, and I want you guys to chime in. I think there needs to be honest discussion from his side, because I think who better to communicate this than himself, and to kind of come to a realization, which I think that he has to a certain extent, but he also has kind of brushed over it. When it comes to the purchasing of the school, was it the right choice? Seeing what's all happening now, all these things are starting to unfold, and it's been 2 years since he purchased the school in Wilmington, Delaware. The question is, was it a good purchase? And I think that he said he paid, a good $400K for the school, which is kind of cheap when you think about it, for a school, it's kind of cheap. But he felt when he initially purchased, I remember, because I shared that overwhelming joy that he experienced. I was like really happy. A lot of us, we were happy, right? We were just like, finally he got to school. You know, but was that excitement, did it overpower his ability to be able to think reasonably and logically as far as what is the best purchase? You know, like, is it a good purchase? I don't know if he consulted with someone who knows real estate. Right? Because if you, I mean, you may know education. Y'all, listen, this thing here, I'm going to turn this on. What is going on? Is this it? It's like a buzz. Like, this phone, you guys. Oh, let's take it out. Let's see if that's the problem. Because I'm like, where is this buzz coming from? But yeah, like, he is well versed in being a school psychologist, right? But it doesn't mean that you're well versed in knowing real estate and purchasing real estate. Knowing which real estate is the best to purchase, and you know, there's certain nuances of it. So certain things are becoming to come to the surface, right? Like, I saw when he went live, and in the video, it was disheartening. It was disappointing to see how there is a sewage problem, right? There's water coming from the ground inside the gym of the school that he purchased. And he just says, he describes it like, oh, it's a little problem. He's like minimizing it, which I guess, okay, it's good to minimize things to make yourself feel not as bad about it. But I think it's also important to accurately assess how big of a problem something is. Because if you underestimate how big of a problem something is, that's going to come with consequences. You know? You underestimate how big a problem something, that's like underestimating the cost of something. Then you go into it very unprepared, ill-equipped. And that's not what you want. You want to be prepared. And I know if he may see this, he may not see this, but I know that he's commented on like people who have their own opinions about what he's doing, which of course everybody got an opinion, right? On what he's doing. He's like, oh, now everybody is an expert in building a school. No, everybody is not an expert, but some people just have advice and have suggestions, and it's okay to listen to people's suggestions, you know? And I see it, I get it, you know, he has the narcissistic trait within him. And I admit that I have a similar trait within me. But I think this is the hallmark of narcissism, right? The hallmark of narcissism is that you have this grandiose idea about who you are and what you're capable of doing, you know, so to the point that it becomes problematic for your own self and for other people. And on top of that, sometimes you're not aware. Like, you're not aware. It's one thing to know, like, okay, I have this tendency about me, right? I have this issue, this behavioral problem. But it's another thing to, like, you know, you got to be aware of it, right? It's one thing to have this issue, and it's another thing to be aware that, okay, you know what, like, it's happening, it's coming out. It's happening right now. Let me get it in check, right? Because if it's like you're shooting yourself in the foot. It becomes self-sabotaging, right? And that's not what you don't want to be like so pompous and like, oh, I got this. Nobody can tell me how to build a school. I don't need anyone's help. And like, people are offering suggestions and offering resources saying, hey, I know a person who has a principal. He's a principal. He has his own school. I can give you the number. They're offering information and resources. And he's like denying it. He's like turning down the help. He's like, nope. I don't need that help, right? So that kind of raised a red flag for me. I'm just like, okay, that's not good. That's definitely not good. I mean, I get that you want to appear competent, but you are competent. There's no question about Dr. Umar Johnson being competent as a principal, as a man who has many years of experience working in schools, diagnosing children, evaluating, and treating. There's no question about that level of competence. I think it's more about people are noticing like the character flaws, right? Because when you go live, and you go live often, and then people say things to trigger you, they're saying things to trigger you, and they're pulling out who you are. They're pulling out the real person beyond the facade that you put on, right? And it's pretty much, the veil has been lifted as far as Dr. Umar Johnson. Like, there's no secret as to who he is now. When before, people, saw him as a very professional person, educated person, which he still is, but that's the only thing that they saw probably in the early part of his career when he was on social media. And then now they're like, okay, beyond that, here's who he really is at his core. And people, that's what people are speaking to. And it could have some truth to it. And even though I'm pointing these things out about him, like, I don't want it to make it like, oh, like we're nitpicking or pointing and being negative. That's not what it's about, because I'm a very positive person. I like to focus on positive things, right, in a person. But on the same token, I think it's also important to just be honest and identify, like, if there is something within us that is wrong, and it can be pretty shameful and feel threatening for a person and multiple people to kind of pinpoint your character flaw in public, right, on social media. Like, that can be embarrassing and it can feel threatening. And I think that's what it is, and that's the reason why he responds so defensively sometimes. But, it's a struggle. And I think there will come a point in time where he will just swallow his pride. Because you realize, like, if you've been doing something a certain way for so long, and it's not working, it's not getting you the results that you're looking for, right? Then it may take some time, because some people are just very rigid. They don't change. He admitted to having ADHD too. I don't know, but he's very stuck in his ways, and not just due to his age. I think he's like in his mid 40s now, or late 40s. It's not just because his age, it's just that it's a character disposition. It's something relating to his personality and who he is, right? And sometimes people are just very resistant. Like, it's an ego thing, and they don't want to break that. They don't want to bend and go away from that, who they are. People are really just in general stuck in their ways. But the thing is like, if you're doing something, right, and you're behaving a certain way over and over again, and you're just like, okay, I still, like, it's not getting you anywhere. And I think the confusion lies where you sometimes, yes, you do make progress, and so you're thinking, okay, well, I've been this way all along. It's gotten me, what he said, 6 degrees. It's gotten me 6 degrees, PhD and certified school psychologist, and all of this accolade and recognition worldwide, internationally, from many different countries, and it's gotten me this name and this status. So on one hand, yes, who he is, right, and all his character flaws has gotten him somewhere, but I think that it will behoove him just to kind of take some personal self-reflection. Like, just dig deep, man. Dig deep. And just be honest and say, you know what? There's something about me. There's something about all of us, too. Like, I have my ways. Like I said, I can identify with the narcissism, like, but the thing is, you got to know how to check that shit and just be humble. And I think it's easier for women. I admit, I'm a woman. It's easier for us socially. We have been conditioned to the point where we can be humble. We're conditioned to be that way. So it's easier for us to submit and say, you know what? Okay, let me fall back. Whereas for a man, especially black men, it's okay, he's a man, right? On one level. Men in our society, no matter the race, have been conditioned to not even show any signs of weakness, to not even cry. It's silly to not cry, to just, oh, I'm macho, I got this, right? It shoots you shoot your own self in the foot, because I've seen this live in person. I'm just like, yo, it's sad the way men are conditioned. And it's a cultural thing too. So it's not just within the male gender of our society, but I think in certain cultures, in African American culture, definitely we don't ask for help. We don't, just certain things we just don't do, whereas we're socialized to not do. And I've seen this firsthand. My friend, I love him to death. He's cool. And he's from a West African country, and I remember visiting him over the Christmas holidays a couple years ago, and he had ordered this TV stand that he needed help putting together. But do you know, he came home from work, went straight to the TV box, the TV stand box, began working on it, right? And he was out there for hours, literally hours, trying to put together this TV stand. And I was in his room, and I would peek out to the living room to see, are you okay? You cool? Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Not one time did he ask for help. And when I say he was out there for at least 6 hours putting together a TV stand. Now, this is a TV stand. It's one of those TV stands that has this kind of makeshift fireplace built into it, where it's like a digital fireplace thing, right? You press a button and it comes on. It's cute, fancy like that, right? But it just shouldn't take no 6 hours to put together. And I'm just he said he don't need help. So I'm the kind of person, I'm not going to jump in. You say you don't need help, you got it. Because I know how y'all men can be kind of pushy, right? So I'm like, okay, you say you don't need help? I'm not going to help. Do you know the following day, he asked me, oh, you saw I needed help. Why you ain't help me? He got upset. I think he was angry, actually. And I'm just I'm a person I love to help. Why didn't you just ask for help? Oh, God. Put himself through unnecessary stress because of the ego, man. The ego. Why? Why are men conditioned this way? Why? I mean, yes, on one hand, I guess it makes them, learn on their own, right? You gotta learn the hard way. It makes them very hard, self-reliant workers. So when they did something right that their hands have built, they can sit back and be like, oh, I did that. I'm a man. I had no help. That's stupid. That's just my personal opinion. That's silly. That's silly. So you would rather struggle for 10 times as long as it takes to do something just to say you did it on your own, as opposed to galvanizing the help of other people, utilizing your resources that are at your disposal, and reducing the amount of time that it takes to do that task. Which makes more sense? Struggling for 10 times the length of time that it should take to do something on your own, just to say, oh, I did it on my own. Or reaching out, taking advantage of the resources that are at your disposal. And you can still look back and say, you know what? I was a leader. I spearheaded this project, but I had help. Name one big, massive corporation, entity, project, foundation, whatever it is, just massive, right? That was put together by one person. You can't name one. Every corporation, foundation, organization, entity that is a very big, massive entity, like Apple, for example, Facebook, for example, involves many different people with many different levels of expertise. So I think that's one of the biggest things, it's the hardest things for some budding entrepreneurs. And granted, yes, Dr. Umar Johnson, he's been raising money for a while, but he's still a relatively new entrepreneur. Okay, yes, he has, organized like lectures, right, where he's set up a lecture at different locations, and he's went out and did his lecture, did his thing. That's one thing, but that's not really being a full-blown entrepreneur, you know what I'm saying? So something that you see characteristic within budding entrepreneurs is that they try to do everything by themselves. Everything. The whole, like, we're talking about a massive project. Building a school. Owning a business. Even though it's a nonprofit, I think he registered it as a nonprofit finally, so he doesn't have to pay taxes on it. It's still a business that involves many different moving parts. And, he says, though, I heard him say on camera that, oh, y'all think y'all know, like I'm doing it by myself. I have help. All right. I'm just interested to see how he responds to people who make a comment on his videos, offering help. And he's just like, oh, I got this. I don't need your help. All right. But as far as the question as to, I have to say this. I don't hear the buzzing anymore. Oh, you stopped because I brought you right here, huh? So as far as the question as to whether or not America needs a school, a special school actually, for black boys, that's a multi-layered question. I would say in a short answer, yes. But we got to think critically about this just from our own professional experience, right? And working with children and just being a human being, right? The whole the labeling of special, especially for African Americans, like we definitely got to be cautious in the words that we use. We know that within our own culture, like you got to be careful and very selective about your choice of words, your diction, because if not, you can turn some people away. And I've seen this even in my own practice where I work currently, is that children don't like to, even though they know that there's something different about them and that they, may struggle in certain areas, right? Cognitively and behaviorally, they don't want to go to the special schools that have been created for them and develop, like people have taken time to consider the needs of these children. And the children are just like, I don't want to go to no special school. I want to go to a regular school. They want to be integrated. It's just the same idea when we rewind back several decades, before there was desegregation, right? And schools were segregated. What did black people fight for? Integration. Because they want to drink from the white people water fountain. They want to go to the white schools. They want to ride on the same bus as the white people and sit where the white people sitting on the bus. They want to live in the white neighborhood. It's the same thing today. People just want to be a part of something that seems normal, what everybody else is doing. So unless this school is promoted as a school that is for kids that can offer them resources, activities, education that matches their special abilities. Like, you have to put it in a certain way. You can't say, oh, it's a special school, because nobody want to go to no slow, excuse my French, retarded, because that word used to be a thing. I know that they kind of banned that word, but it used to be a thing, and that's the word that a lot of people still use in language when referring to people, children and adults, who have different abilities. Nobody wants to go to a school like that, a special needs school or a special school. They want to kind of be integrated and go to a regular school and fit in and feel like, you know, I can carry on and do the things that everybody else can do. It makes sense. So it has to be like couched in terms of like, okay, we have like special programs, special meaning a good kind of special, you know, that can build upon their skills and their abilities. It's special in the sense that other schools don't have this, and it's going to help them develop and grow. And I also was wondering, I don't know if Dr. Umar Johnson, which I think he did kind of speak on this before, like over a year ago, where he said that once the FDMG Academy, you know, is up and running, like after he kind of, you know, because it's basically a pilot. So he's, you know, when you're doing something for the first time, it's a pilot study. You kind of learning what works, what doesn't work, and how things could be improved. And so he says that, you know, he's going to open the FDMG Academy, and then he may consider having like a place for children who have learning disabilities and who have like severe behavioral problems that may need more specialized instruction in a more kind of restrictive setting. And I'm just like, okay, that's a major task. Like that's a major embarking, but I mean, that's a good thing to consider. And I think you should consider that not after FDMG is open and fully operational, but I think you should really consider that like now, before the school is open, because this is the thing. Sometimes the lines get kind of blurry when it comes to, okay, kids with behavior problems, right? Kids, like as he refers to, the ain't no daddy at home syndrome, right? So, it's not that they have ADHD. It's just that, you know, father figures in the home, they need guidance, right? So it's kind of like minimizing it a little bit, which could, in fact, be true, right? And so all they need is just a little bit of guidance, some mentoring, that backbone, that structure, you know, resources and activities and these different things that are afforded to them, right? There's extra attention and they'll be fine. But then you don't want things to kind of slip through the cracks either, because some kids really do have autism. Some kids really do have ADHD. And like I said at the beginning of this video, those are some serious neurological conditions. It's not something that can be fixed with a Band-Aid, right? And I say when I refer to a Band-Aid, I mean, okay, just having a structured school that's Black centered or African centered. Like that's kind of like a Band-Aid in a way. Meaning they need something a little bit more involved, a little bit more specialized, right? A little bit more care given, more care and attention given to these issues, and looking at it from a more of a neurological, biological framework, right? Because you're going to run into major problems if you kind of treat these children who have these neurological conditions as like, oh, all you need is just to don't be lazy kind of thing, right? And he even mentioned that, like in his narrative, you know, and talking about these children that he wants to, you know, work with at his school. He's like, oh, you know, some of them just lazy. They gotta just get up with their ass, and it's just like it's beyond laziness. You know, when a person has depression, it's not laziness. You know, I think in our society, like we have kind of just reduced like we reduce like depression sometimes to, oh, it's just, you know, that person's just lazy. And I say that about myself, but not about other people. You know, I'll just say, oh, I'm being lazy sometimes, which I sometimes am, you know, because it's like a choice. Laziness kind of is a choice, whereas depression is it's complicated, you guys, and there's many different levels to depression too. So of course there's mild, moderate, and severe. When a person is severely depressed, it's not a matter of, oh, they just need to get up and go do something. No, they don't even have the energy. They don't have the wherewithal. You know, like this is a neurological, it's gotten so bad that it's affected their whole genetic, biological makeup, right? Sometimes requiring medication, which I am personally opposed to medication, but you know, sometimes, you know, you might need a little push, right? And medication is just like food, right? Food this is my little smoothie. I have ginger, all kinds of stuff. Ginger, mango, strawberries, oranges in here. But this can be considered a form of medication, right? Something that you take, you put in. Even though medication has been seen to be like, you know, not natural, right? But it's a whole chemistry into how they make medication. But a lot of the things that are in medication is just kind of rooted in what's already in us anyway. So for people who have depression, there is a deficit in serotonin. We already have serotonin in our brain, and they just create these chemicals that activate those neurotransmitters to produce more serotonin in the brain. That's just one example. But it's like, one can make an argument for that. I just say this to say that, you know, there should be care given to consideration for what kind of kids are going to be at this school. You know, being able to screen, you know, I mean, he's a school psychologist. Being able to, like, not only, because even though he has a PhD in clinical psychology, he's not licensed, I think, yet as a clinical psychologist. So school psychologists, their focus is more narrow, which is good. You know, it's a more kind of specialized focus. And working with children who have diagnoses that are usually diagnosed in childhood, you know, like I already said, like autism and ADHD. But what about other things that may need to be assessed and diagnosed? I think, like, cause we were talking about like a very special niche population within the African American community. We know that we have so much trauma, generational trauma that has been passed down, and we just gotta be very careful and specific and strategic about how, as it relates to this school here, or any school, because he may not be the only one who's thinking about developing a school and building a school targeted towards black boys and girls. So anyone who is thinking about this, I just think this is something to consider, that there are so many different things that should be assessed. If we want to take a more holistic approach to education, because, you know, anybody working in the school system knows it's not just about teaching. You know, you become the medical doctor, you become the nurse. There's so many things that come up in these children that need to be addressed before you can even open a book and start to teach. So that's just my spill. I had that on my heart that I wanted to share. I encourage you guys to share your thoughts and opinions on this topic. It's a very loaded topic, I admit. It can be sensitive to some, because some of you guys, I'm right up on your doorstep. Not even on your doorstep, like I'm all up in your living room, right? I'm all in your bedroom. I'm all in your shower. I'm all up on your street, basically. And, you know, it's tough. And I share in your struggle, I share in your challenges. Like, I work with this population, so I even made a post the other day, like, you know what, I have a newfound respect for mothers, parents, even fathers included too, but it just happens to be single black mothers dealing with this. This is a common occurrence. Not to say any other kind of mothers don't deal with it, but, you know, you just see a prevalence within certain demographics, right? And when we're talking about children, oftentimes boys who are diagnosed with autism, ADHD, the mother typically is black or Hispanic. I mean, that's just what I've seen in the clinic I work. And like I said, this is a high volume clinic where I work. This clinic probably diagnoses, or I would say evaluates, diagnoses, and treats more children with autism and ADHD than any other clinic in New York City. I could be wrong, but like I said, we're talking about thousands a year. So it's pretty significant, you know. And of course, this is New York City, so it goes without saying that it's kind of expected, you know, given the numbers of the population here. But what we're going to do, y'all, what are we going to do? Feel free to share your thoughts and suggestions, questions, leave them below, and I'll catch you guys later.